this video, we will be building a multi-bay frame scaffold. We have a 42-inch by 7-foot bay times 3, which makes it a 42-inch by 21-foot multi-bay frame scaffold. First of all, you want to get your material close by and relatively close to where it's going to be built, so you have less back and forth trips later and during the building process. Next, you want to make sure that you measure out your jack pads. We have 42 inches by 7, so that's what's being laid out here. The other thing you want to take into consideration is measuring your jack pads an equal distance from the wall so that your scaffolding will run parallel to your wall. Next, you want to make sure that you take your jacks and set them all at the same height. You don't want one to be down at the bottom and another one up 6 or 12 inches. It's going to make it really difficult to level, and it makes the building process that much harder. So a good rule of thumb is to take your fist, place it on the base, and run the screwing portion down to the top of your fist, making them all the same height. That gives you an up and down adjustment if necessary. Next, you want to lay your frame down, plug your jacks into the bottom of the frame, and then go ahead and lift your frame up. Next, you're going to attach a cross brace, and it's easier if you connect it to the bottom node point first. You have a little bit more control, and then you're also not using as much physical force to do that. You can put it on the top node, as Brandon just showed you, but it is easier and you maintain a little bit more control by attaching the bottom node point first. So you can see that one person can set this frame up by themselves. Once you have that first cross brace connected, you can lean it down on the cross brace and create a tripod. Then you can grab more material, get more jacks, set them to the right elevation, and then go ahead and set your frame on it. Now, standing your jacks up and plugging the frame onto it requires a little bit more upper body strength and does not always go as easy as Brandon made it appear. When you get to this demonstration port and workshop time, you'll get a chance to try it and you'll see that it is easier to put the jacks in while the frames are laying down. One person can set up this scaffold pretty much on their own. Having another person allows you to accomplish other tasks while you're setting up your frame. You can see that I am spreading out the jacks, making sure that they're all at the same elevation, one fist height, for easy up and down adjustment later when we go to level and plumb this. And Brandon will continue to put the frames together. Again, putting the bottom connection on first and then the upper, and then setting the next frame. It's very important to remember when you're placing your jacks on the jack pads to make sure they're centered right in the middle of your jack pad for weight distribution. And part of the modules that you read about earlier, you got to understand how the weight is dispersed through the jack pad. So make sure that the jack is in the center and that you line up the edges so that they run parallel with the jack pad as well. It also helps to make sure that your jack pads are running parallel with the scaffolding, so anytime you're walking outside or inside the scaffolding bay, you're not creating a trip hazard with those jack pads. Next, you want to go and make sure that your scaffolding is parallel to the wall, so you're going to measure just like you did with your jack pads to make sure that your frames are the same distance away from the wall. Because we're relatively flat and level and the jacks are all set roughly to the same height, you can measure from pretty much anywhere. But if you're on an uneven surface or your jacks are not on a level, semi-level adjustment to start with, it's going to throw off how parallel you are to the wall once you go to plumb and level each frame. Another thing you're going to do is square the bays. You can measure from one leg to the opposing corner leg. It's usually easier to do with someone else holding the end of your tape. You're going to measure diagonally through that first bay and then make sure that the measurement is even, exactly the same. So notice I'm moving the frames to adjust it so it's the same measurement parallel to the wall. That is so I don't throw off my adjustment from each frame to the wall. After squaring it, just do a quick double check, make sure that you're still running parallel to the wall. And then you can also go ahead and start nailing down your jack pads. Any adjustments that you do, you're going to want to make sure you double check your measurements. When you're installing your jack pads, you want to make sure the jacks are centered directly in the middle of the jack pad. And then you're going to go ahead and put 2 nails to secure the jacks to the pads. When you drive the nails in, you're going to want to make sure you don't drive them all the way through. And that's mostly just getting a good habit of, depending on what surface you're on. If you're on finished concrete, you don't want to scratch up the concrete by driving the nails all the way through the wood blocks. If you're on a roof, potentially you don't want to drive those nails through the protective layer of the roof and create a leak point. You can see that as Brandon's nailing those on, I'm going through and measuring off the rest of the frames to make sure they're an equal distance as well. And then while I start to nail off the remaining jack pads after that first bay, Brandon is going to go ahead and start leveling the scaffold and making the necessary adjustment on the jacks to ensure that it's level. So he is going to use a gooser. And when you use a gooser or any material to level your scaffold frames, you're going to want to make sure that it is a good piece of material that is not bent or dented or have a buildup of material on it that's going to cause you to have a bad level reading. So you can stick the gooser on any one of those levels of bracing material that's built into the frame. Preferably you want to go to the top of the frame and set it as close to the coupling pins as possible. That way you're right to the outside edge of it, and you'll see why here in just a second. So first you want to measure or level your end frame. Make sure that it is level and plumb. Make whatever adjustments you need to ensure that it's level. And then you're going to move your level to that gooser and adjust the jack that's directly below it to make sure that your bay is level, and then don't forget to level the other side of the frame from that point as well. Now if you don't have goosers, you can choose a tube. In this case we're going to use an 8-foot tube. Again, checking to make sure that the tube is nice and straight. There's no bends, kinks, or built up excess material like mortar, paint, pyrocrete, any of those foreign substances that are on there. Again, sticking it out towards the outside edge of the leg and leveling there first off of your first leveled bay. Then making sure that you go back and leveling the frame to that jack that was just adjusted. While someone is in front leveling, the next person can go ahead and start putting in plank. Make sure that when you're putting in your plank that you don't get planking confused or mixed up. There are low hook plank and there are high hook plank. And if you intermix them, you're going to have uneven surfaces on your working deck, which causes tripping hazards or could potentially lead to a fall. So a lot of the times in the material and racks, you may have multiple kinds of different planks. Make sure that they are all the same. And if not, make sure that you get the right ones that are the same. Another consideration to keep in mind is your material handling and also your work area. When you're carrying your materials, make sure that you're being very aware of finished surfaces around you so that you're not bumping into them. Also be very careful around working with other people in your area so that you may not bump into them as well. So when putting the plank on the frames, you're going to want to throw up the end of the plank over the frame that doesn't have scaffold plank in it already. It makes it a little bit easier to slide it back to the deck that has planking in it. The hooks are offset just a little bit, so you want to make sure that it just slides and drops down in between where it goes. On some of these quick deck planks, you will notice that the plywood extends halfway over the hook, and then it has this very specific notch for the hooks to drop in on the next bay. When you're dragging it on the bay that already has the planking in it, it will potentially, or could, slide off of the bay and drop, causing you harm or someone else that may be there working with you harm if you drop it on them. While I go and get another plank that is the same low hook style, Brandon's going to make sure that all the extra parts and pieces that we use to level are not there and in the way, because they don't need to be used. And just making sure that always as you're going that your area is clean and orderly, maintaining your housekeeping as you go so that you don't have any unnecessary trip hazards or slips hazards. A lot of these planks have wind clips on them. Make sure that they're engaged, and that completes your scaffold. So make sure that all of your drop pins are engaged before you walk away, and that would be your multi-frame scaffold. We'll talk about access on the next video.